on owning land or property. And, there's so much flexibility with exit strategies and, how you can kind of play with those levers. And as you learn more and more, you realize, especially when you're talking about commercial, when you're talking about, single family residential, it's, more based on emotion. It's based on, value per square foot in that area, everything else. But man, when you're talking about commercial, it becomes more like a small business. It's about the revenue you're producing. It's about the expenses. And, so it's, for me, it's really interesting to learn about these different asset classes because they all have a little bit of difference, but at the end of the day, you evaluate them all very similarly. You figure out the cap rate and you go from there.
And the thing I really love about commercial real estate is business to business. So it's a more, you take the emotion out, although the emotions do get the best of us sometimes, but you're usually dealing with another business entity and another business, for it to be a good deal, both of it. Welcome to the Yacht Captain Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Kidd, where every week we dive deep into conversations with real estate pros, business owners, and maritime professionals about their mindset and journey to success. Please help support us on our journey and our channel by liking, subscribing, and commenting below so we can help you in your journey to success. How you doing today, Scott Kidd, the Yacht Captain Investor Podcast? We're here once again with a friend of mine, Hugo Menez. We met through our meetup, like-minded, and Yachty Real Estate. Always enjoy talking to him. So he's here today to tell his story. How you doing today, Hugo?
Doing awesome, Scott. How about yourself, man?
Doing great. Thank you so much for being here. For people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
First of all, man, thanks for the opportunity. So this is actually my first podcast. I've been, I guess, investing since must be '06 now. So for a little while, I'm absolutely obsessed with real estate. It's something that's completely changed, the future of my family's life, and it's something that, I can only appreciate when you have podcasts and things like that, how beneficial it is to share that information. To give that kind of opportunity to people that are just figuring this out, because I know when I was first starting, I had no idea what I was doing. I learned a lot from some really great podcasts. Bigger Pockets, everyone always mentions, but that early stuff, man, especially when they were first getting started, before they were selling things, they were awesome. And I think I mentioned this to you the other night at the meetup, but at the Rod Cleef, I really liked his stuff too. Early on, he really added a lot of value. So I think it's incredible when people like you have these podcasts that really try to add value and get information out there to help people, change their lives effectively. Help kind of shorten that learning curve and help them get access to information that they wouldn't normally have. So, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I appreciate that, because it means a lot to me. Like, because I know when I first started, I was making mistakes and I didn't know where to turn, and I got stuck in that analysis paralysis of like, what do I do next? What do I, and had I found the right people, and that's partially why I started going to meetups and, listening to the podcast, the Bigger Pockets thing. That was a huge thing. It really was, because, I just sat there and became a junkie, I was listening to all the stuff that they had every day, and it led to a whole bunch of other stuff, and it led to me, to starting my own meetup group. And the meetup group, truth be told, I went to a bunch of them that were, well, they were just trying to sell you something. You've been doing, they funnel you to the back of the room, book a call, do this, and buy my course, come to my event, come to this, and it's all a credit card machine at the back.
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the things that's awesome about your meetup, man. It's just people that are out there doing it and people that are getting started. And I really enjoy going and sharing information from the mistakes that I've made and things that I've learned, through the whole process. So I really feel like you've got something great going on there with a good group of people that genuinely just want to, talk real estate and get information out there and kind of help bring each other up, elevate the whole room.
Yeah, and that was the mantra of it, because of those meetups. I got very discouraged, and I probably went to 10 or more, and they were all like that. And then I finally went to one where it ended up being a partner of mine, Annette, and it was just people talking about real estate, having some food, having some drinks, talking, and I was like, well, I can do this. This is nice, you know. And then eventually I thought, well, people on yachts, there's a few that want to, probably want to know more about real estate, and I'd hate for people to go through a whole career and then walk away with nothing, and it's such a volatile business that, you're here today, gone today. It can
Yep.
happen at any time. So real estate's a great thing to create some income. The passive income is can most for the most part not be really very passive
Yep.
at
Yep. No,
times. It can be very active.
and the asset class I'm in, man, it's pretty active. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I know a lot of the stuff that you've done and the projects you're working on are pretty exciting, and you got some very active projects going on. And how did you make that jump? Like from, I know you were saying you were a volleyball coach before, and you were doing that, and then it kind of morphed into doing real estate. Talk to people about that, because a lot of people are kind of hesitant and want to know how to make that next jump.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to share that. So I had a really, I guess, unconventional path into real estate. A lot of people, they work for a brokerage company or they work in, banking for underwriting or something of that matter. And they kind of learn about the industry from work experience. I've kind of been an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur my entire life. And so I've been involved in a bunch of different types of businesses that weren't related to real estate. But I kind of observed something while I was running those businesses, and that's that, real estate keeps going up for one. And, there's some real wealth opportunities that come from purchasing assets through your business. And, real estate's one of them. So I guess my first introduction to real estate was accidental. I bought a condo back in '06, about the worst possible timing you could ever imagine. Peak of the market, I think I paid like 162 for it, almost overnight. Like, it was '07, '08, that value crashed, lost like, probably 20-30% of the value of my condo. I knew nothing about leverage or anything like that back then. So I had some money saved up from a business I had in college, and I think I put 65% down on it when loans were 3.5%, which makes, no sense at all. So I made about every possible mistake there. But, one of the things I learned through that, and one of the reasons I love real estate is that time kind of fixes bad decisions. And so, I lived there for about, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years. I had a really good buddy of mine who was a professional beach volleyball player, a guy named Steve Grotowski, who actually was training to try to be in the Olympics for 2012. So he has dual citizenship, and he was trying to train to be in the London Olympics as a British athlete. And so he was, he had a pretty difficult schedule as far as training goes, but very.
You want to know the one thing that separates investors who win from investors who get wiped out? It's not the deal flow. It's not connections. It's this. Due diligence. Not the skim the deck and hope for the best kind. The real due diligence. Asking the real questions like, who is the sponsor and their team? What is their experience? Does the sponsor have verified exits? What is the downside of the scenario? Are there any hidden fees? If you can't answer these questions and more, you're not really investing. You're speculating or possibly gambling. I built a tool to fix that. It's called the Passive Investor Due Diligence Scorecard. It's free, it's interactive, it's 125 questions across 4 categories. Who is the sponsor's team? What is the market? What are the financials? And what are the potential red flags? You check off what you verify, score updates live. It gives you a clear assessment to help you find out if this is the right fit for your family. It takes about 20 minutes or less, and it could save you years of regret. Use it before you wire another dollar, because the questions you don't ask are the ones that cost you the most.
Goes, but very little finances. And so I said, he wanted to move out of his parents' house. I was like, yeah, come move in with me. So I think he was living in my condo I think I was charging him $200 a month to take one of the rooms there, so he could kind of focus on training. And so he lived there while I was living there. And then after I moved out, I was thinking about selling it, and it was worth, probably $30,000-$40,000 less than what I bought it for. And so I said, I don't want to, take this hit right away, especially because I had so much cash into it. So I just decided to start renting it out. And so I rented it out for probably 10 years. And, one of the nice things about a big down payment is I think it was cash flowing maybe $500 a month, even back then. And so, you rent it out for 10 years and you make 60K a year, and you start do the start to or 6,000 a year, you start do the math on that, and you're like, oh, okay, now that loss kind of got covered by rental. I paid down equity over 15 years, and so when I went to sell it, it actually ended up being a great investment, even though I made every possible mistake. So that was kind of my first introduction to being an investor. It was completely accidental. And then, during that time, I had a couple different businesses. So I started initially with a carpentry business with a couple buddies of mine, other beach volleyball guys actually also. And that was during the construction boom in South Florida. And then it kind of died down. So, we closed that up. And then at that point, I went into a freight forwarding customs brokerage business with my father that we were running out of Miami. And kind of coinciding at the same time, I was trying to build a volleyball program for training athletes from something that was just kind of a side hustle into something that was actually, an actual, I guess, legitimate business that could produce income. And so I was running both of those at the same time. And then when 9/11 hit, there was a ton of oversight that came into the freight forwarding world that made it really difficult for small businesses to kind of have the resources to get through all that red tape. And so we closed that. And, fortunately, the volleyball business had grown. And so with the freight forwarding business, I'd seen my grandfather buy a property in Doral as a warehouse. So we were paying a mortgage on it. And, we watched that gain value. And when he sold it, he made a bunch of money. I think it was like $800,000, which for me at the time was, just an absolutely mind-blowing amount of money that you could make. And, we would have been paying rent anyway, right? So for me, it was kind of like a little bit of a, I guess you could say an aha moment when you're like, okay, there's something here. We basically didn't pay any extra money. You sink a little bit of capital into it, but then you're really not increasing your expenses. You're just paying your mortgage instead of your rent. And so with the volleyball program, at the time we were renting high school facilities, and we were all over the place, renting from 6, 7 schools. It was total chaos. The schedule was really difficult. And we just kind of said, why don't we buy our own building? And so I found a building, I think it was just under 14,000 square feet, but it was on a double lot. So it was, on like 65,000 square feet of land. We bought it in 2014, and we used an SBA loan program, which was great because we only needed 15% down. So, just to kind of share the numbers. So I think we put about 350 down on it. We bought it for $2,050,000, started running our business out of there. And, the first year or two, I'd say our expenses to own were a little bit higher than we would have paid in rent, maybe, 25%, something like that. But once you get into year 3, year 4, rent goes up every year, right? And so, those triple net rents on those properties started to go up, and our mortgage didn't. It was frozen. And so, probably year 3 or year 4, I started to recognize that, I think our expenses are probably flat now. This is great. And then you get into year 6, and you're like, okay, we're saving money now to own this property. And, eventually we sold that business in 2023 along with the building. And, we had gotten about $2.5 million in capital gains from that property. So, that's really what kind of jump started me with this, because we got some capital from the business sale. And then we had a huge cap gain, on the property. And then I didn't want to pay that tax bill. And so we decided to go into a 1031 exchange. And I knew a decent amount about multifamily. I hadn't done anything big, but, duplexes, quads, little things like that. And I couldn't find anything. I was looking for, 10, 15 apartment complex, but I couldn't find anything that penciled out. And so a broker friend of mine recommended that I check out an off-market asset that was a small bay industrial park. So it was 56 bays. Some of the bays are adjoined. Some of them have man doors and bay doors. And there's a bunch of different little details behind that. But, essentially it's like 56 tiny little warehouses. And I told him I know nothing about this asset. You're real nervous because this is essentially, everything I'd built going into one asset. And he said, well, I think you should take a look at it, man. So I started looking at it, and I realized pretty quickly that it's the same underwriting as multifamily, in the sense that you have, the risk is spread out over multiple tenants. And so you have a bunch of different people paying you rent. So when you have, 5% vacancy instead of, if it's a single family home, you have a vacancy, you're at 0, right? Okay. So So I started realizing, these are great. You have that same kind of dynamic where you have the risk spread out. But I started looking at the expenses, and I realized the expense ratio on these properties is in the like 30 and 35% of the gross, instead of, multifamily, you're talking 45%
50,
all day long, minimum.
45,
So
60, depending on its
yeah,
older, you know?
yeah, yeah. I mean that's even if you're managing it pretty well. So, I just said this has to make sense. It looks the same as multifamily, but it looks like the operating expenses are a lot lower. The CapEx seems a lot simpler because these are, essentially concrete boxes. And so, we took everything and kind of said, let's go, and, jumped head first into something we had no idea what we were doing. And we bought a small bay industrial park in Lake Worth.
Nice. Well, that's a great Kickstarter, because I know you own several more now, and because of it, and it's, I know people that build those light bay industrial, and they also do, that's all they buy just because of that reason, because they're all triple net. They're probably what, 3-year leases probably for.
Yeah, so the ones that I have are actually a little bit less sophisticated. So I tend to do when you say small bay, it's typically like 3,000 to like 10,000 square feet, somewhere in that range. I actually tend to target what actually would probably be classified as micro bay. So I go even smaller than that, where a lot of my bays are in the like 500 to 1,000 square foot range. And there's pros and cons to that. The pro is you get a really good dollar value per square foot. So, I'm actually getting gross maybe $32 leases done right now per square foot, which is, pretty high if you look at the rest of the market. The cons are you're not talking about a very sophisticated tenant base typically. So it's small business owners, but you're talking about contractors. A lot of people that do like carpentry, plumbing, AC techs, things like that, which I love, man. I love that tenant base. They're just blue collar. They work hard. They just want an opportunity to provide for their families and produce an income. So, I actually do gross leases instead of triple net because it just simplifies things. And then additionally, when you have, 55 tenants, I don't want to be doing all the bill backs with, the utilities, the taxes, insurance, everything like that for those 55. It's easier for me to just kind of assume it on the whole property, break it down over a square foot level, and kind of work that into the rents. And then I don't have to explain to 55 tenants why I'm sending them a bill every single month for, a number of the changes. So it kind of simplifies everything, keeps it cleaner, and kind of creates less heartburn in the transactions between, my tenants and I.
Yeah, the gross lease works a lot better with this micro bays and small bays, because you are dealing with, probably trades and stuff like that, where it's like you said, 55 different conversations every month is a lot more to manage than, just a straight rent piece. And the good thing about it, from knowing other friends of mine that have these, is that, you're talking about a small business, that's their livelihood. They're going to fight to stay in.
Yep, absolutely. And we find that too. And, my introduction to this space was actually originally when I was doing carpentry. So it was the first business I started when I got out of school and moved back down into South Florida. And the guy that we were subcontracting with, he actually had one of these. It was maybe 1,000 square feet, and we'd store the landings, the spindles, the handrails, and things like that in there. So just the equipment and some of the tools. And so we'd pop into this one every single day and pick up what we needed for a job and pick up the tools, and we'd roll out to the job site. And that's the kind of tenant that I have. And so for me, it's, not only do I really like the tenant base because it's blue collar and they're hard workers and they're responsible, and they really just want the opportunity to keep their business going. But for me, it's really rewarding also because I've been very fortunate in life. I feel like I've been very blessed. And so it gives me an opportunity to kind of give back a little bit. So I do everything I can with the tenants to help them through the process. A lot of them struggle with things like business licenses, getting things registered with Sunbiz, all those things that you you don't really know when you're first starting up. And so I actually help a lot of them with those processes and things like that. And I find that through doing that, you build great relationships with your tenants, and by building those great relationships, man, that they get real sticky as tenants. They tend to hang around, and even as they're growing, they tend to go back to you and say, hey, listen, can I take these 3 bays instead of looking for a new space, because there is a genuine relationship there with them.
Yeah, and they'll probably say, "Hey, I heard a couple, three, four of these are coming, coming available, that kind of stuff." And like you said, it is by you building the relationship, you're building a sticky tenant base. You
Yep.
know, that's the same thing within multifamily and other commercial real
Oh,
estate, where
100%, man.
you treat the client, the resident, like a person, like a human being. You get that sticky tenant base. And we growing up, we had a trash business when I was a kid. My parents had one in Texas, and we had those small bay. We had the whole back. We had the big lot out back with all the
Yep.
trucks. Had the corner part for the office and stuff like that, and they were all kind of the same. That most of the people, they might be only on a 2 or 3 year gross net lease, but they'll probably be there 20 years. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Probably longer. And I've seen what's been more popular now too is that people are, if it's like a few bays, like maybe five or six, and one guy owns the building, you'll see that they sell the business with the whole,
With the
with
property too.
building and stuff too, because sometimes the kids are not necessarily interested in being the landlord or being that, and that's a great tip for everyone is, if you treat people right and treat, the resident, or the business owner that's in there, they're going to be a great, sticky tenant and a sticky resident. That's just something. It just makes good business sense is to keep building that existing relationship rather than trying to go and find a new one.
Yep. And you and I have had discussions about doing the right thing with,
Yeah.
in business. And, I learned that a long time ago through my other businesses also. When you do the right thing by your customers, when you do the right thing with your suppliers, with your distributors, whatever it might be, you tend to forge those longer relationships. And, when things come up or things aren't perfect, you're both a lot more willing to work through some of that adversity together. And,
Yeah.
you have a teammate or a partner instead of just something that's more transactional. So I've always found that that's the way to operate in any way in life. I'm sure it's the same way with your crews. When you're
Yeah.
doing a ship, man, the people have to have faith in you. They have to know that you have their backs, and if
Yeah.
they don't, they're out of there.
Yeah, they're not going to hang around too long if you don't treat them right, or they might. There's not too many people that hang around just for the money because we can work some long hours, and the way I look at it is it doesn't cost anything to be nice and be a decent person.
Yep.
It'll cost you a lot more if you're not.
Yeah. Completely.
You know,
100% agree with that.
it could cost you everything if you just you know the words make a difference, especially you never really know what people are going through, what people are struggling. I've learned potentially as I get older in life, I'm not as sympathetic with people, but I'm a lot more empathetic just because like case in point, your story of you were the carpenter in that bay, you were that guy, and you understand that, hey, maybe this person's having a bad day because of something. So let's just
Yep.
let it go, that. And I saw this comedian, was saying, he said, you know, I forget how he phrased it. He said that me, like when the stewardess is bringing me a soda or something, like, I don't have a right to, that's not her. That's a me, like
Yep.
me bringing the coffee.
Yep.
You know,
You
the,
got to put
you
yourselves
know,
in their shoes.
you know the Uber driver. Well, that's me driving the Uber.
Yep.
And then when you think about it that way, that's a me driving that. And that's me bringing the coffee. And like it gets you into a different mindset. Well, that's me that's having a tough time paying the bay rent. Like, okay,
Yep.
well, maybe they lost a few contracts, or maybe they're going through
Well,
something at home.
so I had that exact same situation happen recently. I had one of my carpenters that does kitchens, but he had finished a couple jobs for a contractor, and the contractor stiffed him. And so
Oh,
he's out all the capital for the product that he picked up. He installed it. He didn't really get a deposit ahead of time, and that's not a great business practice. But at the same time, you feel for him. And so I was a little bit more flexible with him. He handled it the right way. He came to me and said, "Hey, listen,
yeah,
I'm in a tough spot. This guy did me wrong, and I don't really know what to do here. And so I said, hey, let's work out a plan here. And
Yeah.
so, we spread out those couple months over like a 6 month period to kind of help take some of the weight off the beginning of it.
Yeah.
And he delivered. And so when you do things like that, man, those that's how you produce, like you said, sticky tenants, because they know that
Well,
you have their back.
yeah, and the thing is, if people realize that you're willing to work with them, they're more than likely there. Oh, well, he's given me an opportunity. It's like I could
Yep.
be out on the street,
Yep.
so could be, and people that are do that, they become a lot more loyal, and that their
Absolutely.
relationship builds from there. Because we all everybody needs help sometime. We all do.
Yep.
Things happen, But you showed me a project a little while back, was which I really want to talk about and have people share with everybody, is you bought a church.
Yep. Yeah, so and we've talked about this before too. I think you have the same problem that I have. I have a little bit of the shiny penny syndrome when there's something that's interesting or seems like a good opportunity. Sometimes I kind of reach for something that might be way outside of my comfort zone and not of something that I know. And so yeah, I have family. My mom's whole side of the family is from a small town in Michigan called Saginaw, and it's an awesome town. But it was a lot more populated back when General Motors and all the car manufacturers were working out of there. And so it's a little bit less populated now. There's not quite as much industry, but there was a church that came up for sale, and my cousin, she does hair for weddings, and so she had a friend that apparently sent her the listing and said, "Isn't this interesting?" But they didn't really have the opportunity to figure out how to close on it and take it down, and so she sent me the link. And just because she knew that I bought real estate, she thought I'd find it interesting, and I found it more than interesting. So it's you and I understand South Florida prices, so it's when you see something like that, it's mind blowing. But it's 15,615 square feet. It's a beautiful chapel. The chapel, I believe, is maybe, gosh, it must be about 6,000 or 7,000 of that total square footage, maybe even a little bit more than that. But it fits about 250 people when you work out the floor plan and everything like that for a wedding. But it's gorgeous. I mean, huge, really ornate wood carpentry on the ceilings, and that always gets me because of my carpentry background. There's really cool stained glass windows. And then, there's also a little reception hall off to the side that's maybe another 3,000 square feet. And then there's another 4,500 square foot house, and it's on 4.6 acres of land. So it's a pretty significant property, I guess you could say. And they were asking $300,000 for it from the diocese. And so when I saw this is an opportunity, I figured we have to buy it. And so we started looking into financing because we knew there was going to be a pretty hefty renovation. We're estimating maybe 600 to 700K in renovation to kind of get it ready to go as a wedding venue is what we decided to do with it. And so we started looking into financing, and it was a little unique because there's no in-place business revenue, so you can't use like a typical real estate loan that works off DSCR or anything like that. No debt coverage there, and there's no real comps as far as like appraisals go, so you can't use just a value-based type of loan there. So that was kind of difficult. And then you can't really use a business loan because it's a business that doesn't exist. We don't have a wedding venue business, and so the only option really was to go the SBA route. And so we're doing an SBA loan. We ended up having to close on it cash because the seller was getting a little bit jumpy, but we're still able to use the SBA loan proceeds for the renovation. So we're working through that process right now, but we're excited about it. It's a beautiful property. Some awesome pictures. I can share the address. I don't know if you do notes for it. But
Yeah, I can do the show notes. I can put them in the show notes.
Yeah, just think if any of your listeners want to see it, it's pretty incredible. But yeah, so we're starting a business in St. Charles, Michigan, man.
Uh, nice. Well, definitely send me the link. I'll make sure and put it in the show notes, and we'll put it in the comments and stuff like that. So if people want to check out the project, and we'll definitely be following up later on and have you back on and showcase what you guys have done. And I did just working on boats and doing like one of my favorite things to do is on the boat is varnish. On this boat, we don't have a whole lot of varnish, but
Really makes the
It's
wood
just for
pop,
me.
man.
It's like therapeutic for me because it
Yep.
takes a lot of sanding and a lot of just honing everything, and it's all in the prep. And when you finally get everything on, and it's one of those things where
Rewarding.
the last coat is the last coat. It's never done. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, you get all the way to the end, and like you get one little mess up. Oh no, we're
Yeah,
doing
no,
it.
I gotta go again.
We're gonna
Yeah.
do it again tomorrow, whatever, you go back down on it and everything. But no, that's especially like a project like that. I have another friend. He actually did I should actually put you two guys together because it's up in Rhode Island. He did a conversion of a church to a multifamily. I think it's like
Oh,
24
that's
units,
cool.
stuff like that. And he kept the stained glass, and it's a stone church, because it's in New England. So it's
Yep.
at, now I think the city, because they saw what he did, they want to see like all they want more of these historic renovations and stuff like that. And it's a really cool project and it's really pretty. So I'll definitely connect you two guys so you guys can talk about it because that's the one thing that did stick out to me was all that woodwork in there and
Yeah.
everything else. And, for $300,000, if worse comes to worse and everything goes bad, you and your entire family can go live in the 16,000.
We'd have the coolest house in St. Charles, man.
Yeah. And you're protected because,
Yep. Well, actually, they so part of the process in selling it, the diocese actually unblessed it. So
Oh,
they unblessed the property and they had to take everything that had been anointed with either holy water or oil, and they actually have a burial for it, believe it or not. So they
really?
take it to the cemetery and they bury it. So they buried like some of the religious relics and things like that were in the church, which I found very interesting. One of the
Oh.
Roman Catholic procedures, man.
Really? I did
Yeah.
not know that. They go and bury it, all the stuff. Okay. But is the graveyard on the
No,
oh, I was
no,
gonna
they
say, oh man,
yeah,
what do you
no,
do about that?
we didn't take over the cemetery. Yeah.
But this usually older churches in
They have them
general,
on
they have
site.
a cemetery on site, so it's probably off site. Well, that's a whole other thing. I did have somebody, and that's for a whole nother episode. Of someone, a good friend of mine was sending me a cemetery for sale, and I was like, I do not know anything about a cemetery.
What's
It's like, oh,
is it like rent per unit? Like is that how this
yeah,
works?
well,
Like
he kept telling me he's an older gentleman, and he's a pretty funny guy. He said, "Look, people are dying to get in there. You got customers that stay with you forever." And I'm like, "Oh,
yeah, talking about a sticky tenant, man. They're not going anywhere.
yeah." And you sell the plots, and I forget how many acres it was, and only 17 of it had been used, and it was like a huge plot, and it had been in business for since the 80s and stuff, and the the owners did not want to sell it to like a large equity firm. There were some large equity firms that had been buying up all the mortuaries and all the cemeteries and stuff, but they did not want to sell to them. They wanted it to be somebody, and I was, I almost got bitten like you with that, but they were okay with seller financing, but it was like the terms were weird, like
That's
50% down and 5%. I said, well, I'd be better off going to the bank at that point.
But that's one of the things that I find so awesome about real estate, man, is, obviously I don't really want to own a cemetery, but
No.
there's so many unique niche little opportunities for how to capitalize on owning land or property. And, there's so much flexibility with exit strategies and, how you can kind of play with those levers. And as you learn more and more, you realize, especially when you're talking about commercial, when you're talking about, single family residential, it's, more based on emotion. It's based on, value per
Yeah.
square foot in that area, everything else. But man, when you're talking about commercial, it becomes more like a small business. It's about the
Yeah.
revenue you're producing. It's about the expenses. And, so it's, for me, it's really interesting to learn about these different asset classes because they all have a little bit of
Yeah.
difference, but at the end of the day, you evaluate them all very similarly. You
Yeah.
figure out the cap rate and you go from there.
And the thing I really love about commercial real estate is business to business. So it's a more there's you take the emotion out, although the emotions do get the best of us sometimes, but you're usually dealing with another business
Yeah.
entity. another business, and for
It's
it
a
to
little
be a good
cleaner.
deal, both of it has to work for both, or it's not a deal. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? There else there's so everyone has to work or compromise, and that's with the commercial real estate. I really like the fact that it's very similar to what I do on the boats. It's you got to have a team, you got to have people. We need people, and it's very, very relationship intense.
Yeah.
There's not many people that do it all on their own and just steamroller ever over everybody, unless, and even the big guys, they have a huge team. They've
Yeah.
a whole bunch of people, and
Usually the big guys are the
so,
ones with the biggest teams because you need so much institutional capital to take down some of these properties.
yeah,
When you're talking about the really big players, it's just some of these parks. The ones I get are not like that. You're talking typically between like $3 to $10 million. But when you're talking
yeah,
about some of these big ones, they're 150, $200 million, and they're
yeah,
hundreds of thousands of square feet.
yeah. And it's funny, that just throughout my life, I'm looking, now I'm looking at $3 to $10 million, and we're both thinking, well, that's a small cap property, and then you're
Yeah,
20
right.
mid cap, and I'm like, really, and like,
Perspective really changes. Yeah,
yeah, when I got the multifamily stuff, and we're raising money for, like 5-10 million dollar property, and I found out about, how the private equity stuff works. And when I would go to them, and they'd be like, no, it's too small. I'm like, too
yeah.
small?
Excuse
Like,
me. Yeah,
yeah, like,
yeah,
okay, and I don't want to say I wasn't insulted, but I was more curious to, like, okay, well, because the question I always ask is, and this is a good tip for everybody. Like, if somebody says something doesn't work, it's okay. Well, what would work for you? What do you look for? Just so you get an idea, and you make notes on, if you do come across something, could be an opportunity there later on. That what would work for you. Like, well, no, we like to write checks of minimum 5 to 10, five more close to 10 million, or else it's not really worth our time.
yeah,
And we'd like to see X, Y, and Z, a certain amount of track record, certain amount of, time in that asset class, certain amount of exits, certain amount of, everything. And then I was like, okay, well, obviously I need more of that backing. Like, I need to be involved with people that are bigger and doing bigger things. They kind of that one question helped me get to the point where, okay, I need to surround myself with, with a different set of people. I keep hearing, it keeps coming up, show me your friends, I'll show you your
yeah.
future, and it's something that, that's funny. Speak of, speak of the cemetery, my iPad's actually ringing with the guy that was sending me
Oh,
the
really? You can tell, man.
wonder if he's haunting me now.
Yeah, probably. Got some insider information. All the spirits there telling him what's up.
Yeah, he's well, he's something else. He's a different breed. He
I feel
really
like
is.
you have to have a sense of humor if that's what you do for a living, right?
Yeah, well, and he sent me some other stuff, like some other interesting, some small and big bay, like some of them were like quasi mixed use, like you have bays, and then it's kind of an RV park in the back with some storage and campground. It's kind of
Yeah.
like I was like, well, there's too much going on here. Like, I wouldn't really know which one of these to focus on, that would actually work. But, and he sent me some very unique, like
Well,
a pizza shop with two or three multifamily on top,
so
and
I just got sent an interesting one too from someone that I really respected. I actually met through remember Matt Thurman's
yeah,
group
yeah,
meeting. So I met someone through there, a really good guy actually, and he has kind of an interesting listing. I'm interested in retail also. I really want to focus on this asset class just because it's making a lot of sense and it's working for me. But it's a retail, like 3 or 4 tenant retail right on Federal and Delray, but it has apartments up top, and I'm like, man. The last thing I want to deal with is a retail property where I need a property manager that can handle retail and
yeah,
residential tenants. It's like, and I think that's a skill that you also learn as you do this a little bit longer too, is every opportunity isn't always a great opportunity that
Yeah.
fits you, right, and your needs. And you kind of have to have your qualifiers and say, this is for me and this isn't for me. And kind of, as you kind of get further into this and dig deeper, you learn how to say no. Whereas
Yeah.
I think when you're first starting, it's like anything where the numbers make sense, you just want to get it.
Yeah, because you remember the times when things weren't making sense and you
Yep.
weren't making anything, so you're hungry and you're jumping on everything that you possibly can. But that's a great point and a great tip for everyone that's listening. You know, a a mixed use property, a retail property manager, commercial retail property manager is much different than a residential apartment manager, and
Absolutely.
generally not the same skills, and it's not the same people. It's not dealing with the same exact things. So you really have to take that in, because what'll end up happening is you'll probably end up managing that property. And do you want another? I mean, that's fine if you have a bunch of properties like that and that's what you want to make money off of. But if you want to be on the investment side, that is another job for you that you have to take care of, that might not necessarily, it might be taking away all your time.
Yep.
I
Well, I think
personally,
when you kind of have those weird properties like that too, you run the risk of, is the business, irritating the tenants, and, the residential tenants, or the residential tenants, getting
irritating
irritating the
business.
businesses, right? Because there's
Yeah.
some guy that's on his balcony smoking weed in the middle of the day or something, something like that, that
Yeah.
just,
Just throwing his
completely,
beer cans over the balcony
yeah,
there.
you never know. I mean, you've been doing real estate for a while. It's crazy the situations you run into.
Yeah, it's always, that I learned this a long time ago, that, the boat or the property is logical. We can fix anything that's wrong with it. The people problems,
That suffer.
they take a little bit longer and sometimes forever, because a lot of people don't deal with their problems, or haven't dealt with it and don't deal with it. So
Yeah.
then that becomes your problem. That could be a big problem. What you think might be, oh, they just didn't clean up outside. Well, then you go in the apartment or you go inside the business and it's a hoarder's nest.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the last thing you want to deal with.
And it's like, oh, what have I stepped into? I thought this was just going to be something to clean. It's famous last words. Oh, this will only take a minute.
I had a duplex that I bought in East Fort Lauderdale in Imperial Point. I don't know if I told you about this one, where I had the elderly lady that was living in it. But she'd been there for 26 years. The owner of the property actually passed away. It was a dentist here in South Florida.
Oh,
And
yes,
he
yes.
passed away, and he was really smart. He had it in a trust. So the trust had designated his sister as the beneficiary. So it was, they didn't have to do with probate or anything like that. But his sister didn't want anything to do with owning real estate. So she right away just basically went to sell it. And it was a really good price at the time. I think it was for 480K in 2021, which is a pretty good price for a nice duplex in a really nice neighborhood.
Yeah.
Big units too. And so on one side, there was a tenant that was 76 or 77 years old. She lived there for 26 years and had smoked the entire time she was in there. And she was paying $750 a month for rent in a 2-bedroom in Imperial Point, which is, easily at the time, $2,500 a month. So, I mean, you're talking, less than half, basically 1/3 of what she should have been paying. And so I wasn't going to evict her, because I'm not going to be that guy that buys a property and kicks out a
Yeah.
76-year-old and puts her on the street after she's lived there for
Yeah.
26
Again,
years.
just to interject, that's doing the right thing again.
Yep, yep. And so I wasn't going to be that guy, right? And so she had a little bit of dementia and had some problems communicating. So I actually started talking to her sister, and I said, "Hey, listen, we're buying this property. I'm not going to kick your sister out. I'm not going to be that person. But if there's anything she can do to help, kind of with the situation, it would be really beneficial to me. Could she pay a little bit more rent?" And I think she ended up saying, "Listen, she can go up to 1,100, which is still way less than half of what market value was at the time." And she said, "Can you give her a couple of years to figure out her living situation, because she's probably going to a home at some point soon anyway." I said, "No problem. We'll work this out." And so the day before closing, I get a call from the seller that the elderly lady had actually had a stroke and passed away the day before closing. And I was like, and you talk about like situations, right? And so I'm trying to do the right thing here. And now I'm like, oh man. So, the first thing I do is call the sister, and I'm so sorry. I can't believe you're having to deal with this. There's, just so I'm still going to go through the transaction, but there's no rush here. Take your time getting her stuff out. I understand, this can be really difficult. You're still processing, the grief, and you're going through the mourning process. You don't have to get everything out of here. Take your time. And so she said, okay, I really appreciate that. She calls me back like maybe a day later and says, hey, I have a favor to ask. Can I pay you rent to keep the unit? I said, yeah, sure. Why? She had her sister had a cat, and she didn't want to rehome the cat. So I ended up with a cat tenant for like 6 months, and she paid more rent, by the way. She said, I'll pay you $1,200 a month for the cat to stay there and to give me time to figure out where to rehome the cat. And so I said, okay. So I pulled all the permits and got everything ready for the renovation, and then just waited for her to move the cat out 6 months later. But so that one was an interesting one. Day before closing, you have tenant pass away, and then you have a cat tenant for 6 months.
The biggest cat sitting bill I've ever.
Seriously. Well, then she ended up moving the cat into her own house because she wasn't sure what she wanted to do to rehome it. And I'm like, you could have done that 6 months ago and saved yourself a lot of money, but she was awesome. She was an incredible lady. And really handled the whole situation, the right way also.
Well, so it's also because of the way you approached it. You went and communicated and talked to them and said, hey, what's going to work here? What do we need to do here? It wasn't just like, hey, you need to get her out of here. It was a human situation that could have been a dehumanizing situation. Like her sister died.
Yeah, you can't do that though. Or at least I can't. Some landlords can, but I know you can.
Some people start throwing the stuff out on the street. It's like, well, there's no way I could do that, and that's tough. But it all comes back to you because everything's stabilized now for you, and everything's working out well. I mean, it's the long game anyway. If you can cover that for a little bit and help somebody out.
We're up to, I think we're a little over 6,000 gross now between the two units. In that duplex we bought for 480, so we'll take that any day of the week.
Oh yeah, that's doing real. And you probably got it 2021. You said you probably got a decent rate on it.
4.5.
Oh, yep. Good. Yeah, you're not going anywhere on that one. That's probably a 30-year fixed, probably, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Let that ride and it's all fixed up now. So, roof, everything's probably less than a few years old. So you got everything.
Yeah, we got it appraised, and I think it was at 9. I don't remember where at 9, but I think it was 925. It was 925 or 930, and I put about 175 in the renovation. So that one was a pretty big win in valuation.
Yeah, so you still got some equity you can pull out of it. What have you at some point? Excellent. I always refi. Well, I'm probably not going to refi for a long time because I doubt
rates go down. Yeah, 4.5.
I doubt we'll see 4.5 for any time.
Yeah. I'd love to pull some capital out, but every time I look at it, I'm like, I'm not taking. I mean, I only have, I think it's 330 in debt on that one, so it's not super expensive if I had a point or so, but I just don't want to lose that rate.
You can always do a line of credit or something against it if you want to do something with that, if push comes to shove, you could sell it or what have you. But 4.5, we probably won't see that for a while, especially with everything going on.
I agree.
No, this has been really great. I really appreciate you coming on and telling your stories. And, I'm glad I got to be podcast number 1 for Hugo.
I appreciate the opportunity, Scott, for real.
Yeah. And so just so for our listeners and stuff, where's the best way for people to find you?
So if you have any questions, they can actually email me. Actually, I would love to help anyone that wants to get into this space. Just a quick and kind of dirty way that we look at these properties is we look at something that we can bring up the gross rents by about 30 to 35% within a 3 to 5 year hold. And if you can do that, you're going to double your equity in that 3 to 5 year hold. So, just quick math, let's say you're, because it's based on cap rate. So let's say you're grossing $300,000, 200,000 is the net. So you have about 30% expenses roughly. If you can bring that rental up by 30%, that brings you to 400,000 gross. Let's say your expenses go up $40,000. Your new valuation, it basically goes from being roughly worth $3 million to worth 4.2, and you put $1 million down is essentially the way that works out. So you more than doubled your equity by bringing your rents up by about 30%. So if you find a property in the small bay space where you can increase that rent by about 30%, you can double your money on that property. And it's a little tough to get comps. You have to kind of make phone calls and visit properties and things like that. But but it's really it's a huge opportunity. I think that the people are missing out on. It's not as sexy as multifamily. It's not as popular, but man, the numbers just work. But yeah, if anyone wants to get involved and get more information, they can reach me at Hugo, Hugo, at smallbayinvesting.com. They can shoot me an email. I'd be happy to help mentor them. Give them any information, even if it's just a deal that they want another set of eyes on. I'm not the kind of person that'll steal a deal from you, but I'll help you out a little bit with the underwriting process because it can be overwhelming. And, there are things you want to look out for. There's a lot of environmental risks with these kind of properties. And, like any other property, the pro formas are usually kind of BS like in multifamily.
Yeah.
And so you kind of got to do your own pro forma to figure out where the real numbers lie.
Yeah,
But,
I would take the pro forma numbers from the brokers and stuff with a grain of salt because
yeah,
they're usually missing the underlying message of what to actually do, and don't ever buy something on projected returns. Buy on actuals.
yeah,
That's
100%.
if it doesn't, I've had so many times where people have said, "Hey, well, you could raise the rents or whatever 20%, and you'll be making this and that." And I was like, yeah, but I can't buy it based on that. If that's possible, why aren't they doing it now?
Yep.
If they were doing it now, they probably wouldn't be selling it.
Yep. Yeah. And I sometimes will share in some of that projected upside.
Yeah.
But that's only if I know that I can actually get those rents up. I'm not taking the broker's word for it. It's something where I've looked in the area. I see the condition of the current property. I have a plan for how I can improve it to bring it up to, another market comp, and where that market comp is going to land it, might have that rent that we need for it to make sense at that purchase price. But you're not paying based on pro forma. You've got to figure out your own numbers and buy on actuals 100%. Make them prove it.
Most definitely. I mean, that's great. Another great piece of advice. I really appreciate you coming on and letting me know, telling everyone more about what you're working on, and look forward to seeing more projects and hopefully seeing all the expansion and getting you on a bunch more podcasts, and it's going to be really great.
Love to be on here again, man. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, Scott. And, thanks for introducing me to your listeners, and look forward to seeing you probably in another month at the meetup.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, again, this is Scott Kidd, the Yacht Captain Investor podcast. This is a quick reminder that the best investment you can make is the one you make in yourself. So invest heavily in yourself, and we'll see you next time.